Welcome back to the podcast. I am excited and fantastically pleased to bring on a first-time guest, David Pepose, who's currently writing Captain Planet, Space Ghost, and soon to be released from Mad Cave, Speed Racer. David, I always ask each time somebody comes on the guest if they're new, what's their origin story?
Yeah, I'm a third generation comics reader. My grandfather read them. My mother read them. My mother got me a copy of Amazing Spider-Man 346 when I was a kid. And yeah, it made me a lifer. Comics have always been my passion for as long as I could remember. And so, yeah, every day I pinch myself that this is the industry I get to work in.
So, did you always think you'd be working for the comic book industry, or is it something you just stumbled upon?
It wasn't until I was in college that I kind of gave myself just the opportunity to think about what it might be. If I had a dream job, what would it be? And it would be to work in comics. I wound up interning at DC in 2008 during Batman RIP and Final Crisis. And it was also right around when the Great Recession hit. So there weren't any jobs to be had. I wound up working as a newspaper reporter for a few years. And then I wound up working in publicity at CBS for a number of years after that. And I thought that was going to be my future. I did comics journalism at Newsarama. I moonlit there on the side. But it was finally, I figured, why not just take a shot at this? I think I was hitting a lull where there were a lot of books that I wasn't really responding to. And so I felt like I had to change my relationship with comics a little bit. Either I needed to put the stories out that I wanted to read, or I needed to just drop this and let this become maybe a hobby or maybe let it rest. And yeah, during my quiet hours, I pecked away at a book called Spencer and Locke. And people seemed to really respond to that book. We pitched it as what if Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City? And yeah, people seem to really respond to it. And I realized, oh, like I could actually do this as a job.
You won a Ringo Award for that in 2021. How'd that feel getting that right out the gate?
It took a few years. My first book came out in 2017. To get a Ringo even 4 years in is a huge honor. But I spent many years. Remember, my first book came out in 2017. My first industry internship was 2008. And I think that's like a lesson that a lot of comic creators probably share is that every seemingly overnight success is like a 10-year process. I just hit, I think, like my eighth anniversary since my first book was published. I still feel like I'm a journeyman at all this. And I feel very fortunate for the amazing reception that many of my books have gotten. But I still consider myself a work in progress. And I hope that there's a long way to go because I'd like to stay in this industry, in this career for a good long time. So for me, it's every day is trying to get up and do my best work and be worthy of it and keep growing as a writer and creator.
In 2022, you did the last two issues of Fantastic Four following Dan Slott's run. It was like a two-issue fill-in, and at first I thought it was a money grab from Marvel for the Judgment Day tie-in. But when I realized it was you who wrote it, I had to go back and reread it because, in my opinion, those two solid issues are the template of what the Fantastic Four are all about in the core. How did you go about getting those two issues?
Yeah, that came from I've worked with Tom Brevoort, who he was my editor on Savage Avengers. He was my editor on Moon Knight City of the Dead, Punisher, Cable Love and Chrome. So I've been working with Tom pretty much on almost every project I've done at Marvel. And when Dan Slott was wrapping up his run on Fantastic Four, and I believe, unless I'm misremembering it, they wanted to buy Ryan North a little bit more lead time before his issue dropped. And I think if I also recall correctly, I don't think the Judgment Day event, I know certain events like Blood Hunt have their own like spin-off series. But I do believe that Judgment Day, they were trying to tie in those issues in their respective series. So like Spider-Man had a Judgment Day issue and Avengers had a Judgment Day issue. And so for Fantastic Four, we had a two-parter to do that. And yeah, I thought it was a fun exercise, not only in writing characters that I was really nervous about when I had told my wife only a few weeks prior that the only characters I don't think I'd have any ideas for would be the Fantastic Four. I get the call from Tom. I think they actually wound up being some of my favorite characters to write at Marvel. I think because their personalities are so distinct and the family bond, I think, is so human. But yeah, I think it was an incredible honor to be the intermission act between Dan, who's a writer I really respect, who I really love, who I've learned a lot from over the years, and Ryan North, who his approach on Fantastic Four really informed my approach on Space Ghost. So it's an honor to be the footnote in between those two runs. It is a wonderful opportunity, and the story that we came up with Juan Cabal it was in reaction to the general premise of Judgment Day. A celestial is threatening the Earth, and my first question to Tom was, "Where's the Fantastic Four in this?" Big purple people eaters are like their forte. The obvious answer is it's not a Fantastic Four event; it's Avengers, X-Men, and Eternals. And so that kind of informed my approach on that two-parter was, okay, if the Fantastic Four aren't taking point on this, where are they? And so doing a literal bottle episode or a bottle two-parter, it wound up just being like a fun way to honor those characters and explain why they didn't have a bigger role in the ongoing event.
So, do you consider yourself right now a hot writer? How do you handle that?
Only my wife calls me a hot writer. No, I consider myself firmly mid-tier. I think there's a lot to go, and for me, my only goal is to take the biggest possible swing I can with every issue and try to be as consistent as I can be. I feel like trust and reputation are the two most important currencies in this business, and it takes a while to build both. So for me, that's what I'm always trying to do, establish trust with new readers with every new series and try to show them that, hey, if you like this book, you might like this other book, that you can trust the level of consistency among my titles. Yeah, I think there's always room to strive. There's always room to reach and do better. I consider myself very grateful for the books that I've been able to get, particularly with the job security that comes with that. Space Ghost, they offered me 13 issues to start, and now we're relaunching with a new number one. And Speed Racer, they offered me a 16 issue runway. Those are not guarantees you typically get in the comics business, let alone over multiple titles. So yeah, I think for me, it's just always trying to do better. And hopefully, with each new book, we'll bring in new readers along the way.
Do you have a feeling inside as a writer, is, oh my gosh, I'm so popular now. How do I top this? Or afraid of letting the fans down?
I think I'm always trying to make sure that I do right by the fans. I always want to deliver my best work. This is not a job where phoning it in makes sense to me because both of what I said about reputation, but also just, I don't know, there's enough like disposable entertainment out there. I hope my aspiration is that people remember my books and maybe people might revisit those books down the line or maybe at least carry fond memories of that book before moving on to whatever the next thing is. Maybe that's me being naive. But I think it's always a learning curve. I'm very grateful that the books have been well received, but I think with each new book, there's a level of scrutiny that comes with it. And that's certainly a learning curve. I noticed it most acutely when I jumped to Marvel from the indie scene, is suddenly when you're an indie person, if people are discovering your work, you know that they come from a nurturing place because they are looking for the new thing. They're looking for something that's off the beaten path. And if they don't like it, they just won't talk about it. Whereas when you're working at a place like Marvel or where you're working on licensed IP like Space Ghost and Captain Planet, Speed Racer, I do think people tend to forget that you're a human being. They will make comments that is not really about you. It's about your publisher or it's about a character. Sometimes these characters that are so long running, even though they're fictional to some fans, they feel more real than the people making them. And so I think that's an ongoing learning curve. It's just figuring out like I want to be present. I want to engage with the readers. I feel like it's the least I can do for them showing up and supporting my work. But at the same time, it's also about how do you keep your sanity and how do you I'm a big believer in curating your social media because people will drive you crazy if you let them. So I think it's always just remembering what a privilege it is to be here, holding on to the people who support you and being grateful for that, continuing to be grateful and inspired for the other great work that's coming out that inspires me to keep going. The satisfaction of feeling like a job has been well done to your level of specification, to your level of standards. And that's something I'm constantly chasing. And that's really all I can do. Beyond that, therapy, sleep, a very supportive wife, some very supportive friends. I think it's in a lot of ways it's a taste of what like the film and music celebrities get. But on the other hand, it's at the frequency and repetition of a professional sports player. Now, granted, it's at a much smaller pond, but yeah, it's every your whole life gets shaped around like, all right, I got to show up every week. And I have to do that in a way that like I keep my feet in the ground. That's why I consider myself really fortunate that I consider myself firmly mid-tier is because even that level of recognition in the greater industry, it can be a real head trip. And I think if you're not careful, it can really warp your sense of self. And so that's something that I've always been really vigilant about, making sure that I have friends outside this industry, making sure my wife is not a part of this industry. I think sometimes you just need to go outside, get a breath of fresh air, touch grass. I love comics, but it can't just be your whole life. And so I think that's an ongoing process that every comics creator, once they've been around long enough, is something that they have to contend with.
So I find it interesting that Marvel and DC both do it to a certain extent where they license out their IP properties
Yeah.
to other companies. Space Ghost and Captain Planet are both really DC properties. How much creative freedom do you have to do what you do without DC stepping on your toes, or I should say Warner stepping on
Yeah,
your toes?
yeah. I think by virtue of them being Warner Brothers properties, I've actually gotten a lot of latitude with both of those books, as with Speed Racer. I think a lot when you have a long dormant property like those three books, I think when the licensor wants to bring it back, there's usually only kind of two avenues. You either do a direct continuation of the original cartoons, which that's not my preferred mode. My thinking is those cartoons already exist, and I don't want to show up 20 years too late for a party that somebody else has already done better than me. I prefer to do the reboot and modernization, something like what Daniel Warren Johnson did on Transformers and Josh Williamson on the G.I. Joe books. I like that because then you can have your cake and eat it too, and that it's accessible. You don't have to watch the cartoon to get on board, but we're drawing from all that mythology because I watched all the cartoons to prepare. And so that way, all the people who are diehard fans, they're like, oh, hey, I remember Zorak. I remember the car acrobatic team. We're able to thread all that stuff in there. But thus far, I've been really fortunate, and maybe it's because they're long dormant properties. The licensors I've worked with have all been very receptive to that. That they're like, oh, yeah, we want to modernize these things. We want them to feel relevant. We want them to feel fresh and accessible and maybe get a new generation of people excited. So, yeah, Warner Brothers and Tatsunoko have been extremely supportive, have given me a ton of latitude. I think I've gotten two notes on Space Ghost in the year plus that I've written it, and they were very small notes. It was like tweaking one line and asking if a splatter of blood could be like a silhouette versus like showing off the full thing of blood. So that wasn't even like a note for me. That was for Jonathan Lau, our artist. And yeah, Captain Planet, I think we had one note so far, the whole first arc. It was asking if we could add some more mythology for Captain Planet in the second issue, which we did, and I think that was a great note. Yeah, I think every licensor is different though. Like I've worked with Lucasfilm, I've worked with Conan Properties, and I do think the properties that are ongoing, yeah, you have to color within the lines. The licensors have other plans going on and they want to make sure that things feel consistent. And there's a lot of internal stuff that you can't be privy to. And that's why you have the licensors, is that they can steer you in a particular direction, like saying, hey, we've already got something going on like this, or hey, can we dig into this particular angle a little bit more, or just helping out with the continuity. And so every licensor is different, but I've been really fortunate with the ones I've been able to work with.
So why did Dynamite approach you to do Space Ghost?
I think they approached me because I had done like a streak of like gritty street level heroes. I'd written Moon Knight, City of the Dead. I'd written Punisher. I did The Devil That Wears My Face. So, and I've known Nick Barucci over there for a long time. I think he must have felt like I had hit a critical mass to take this on. And yeah, I took it on for a variety of reasons. First off, my schedule was opening up. And so I was like, the idea of a long run, that's really exciting. That's a fun challenge that I had yet to do. But as I talked with some of my friends about it, who they're a little older than me and they grew up watching Space Ghost as it came out, they were like, I think you could do something really cool with this. And so we talked a little bit about the roots of Space Ghost riffing off of Adam West's Batman. And I thought, oh, like a sci-fi cosmic Batman could be like a really fun, cool story to write. As I started watching the original episodes, realizing how much of a role Jan and Jace played in the series, that you can't really tell a Space Ghost story without Jan and Jace. It doesn't feel natural. That really cracked the whole story wide open for me in terms of emotional stakes. I had no idea if people were going to go for it. I think this was very much a case of a leap of faith, of saying, okay, here's my theme that I feel really strongly about, and here's the structure, which I feel like is the best possible way to tell a Space Ghost story and to leverage all that amazing mythology from the original cartoons, and then rolling the dice and seeing where the chips fall. Nobody's more surprised than me to see the response to that book. I did not think that Space Ghost had that kind of fandom behind him. Frankly, I think a lot of people, I was thinking they'd think coast to coast, or they would just half remember the character through cultural osmosis. People have really rallied around the book. I couldn't be more thrilled.
It's unfair to just talk about you as the writer of Space Ghost because you got really lucky with the creative team, all the way from Jonathan Lau as the artist,
Yeah.
even the colorist, the letterer, the whole package does Jonathan contribute to the story, or how does that work with collaboration between you?
Yeah, I think Jonathan and Andrew Dahlhaus, our colorist, and Taylor Esposito, our letterer, I think he really elevates the scripts I send him. Jonathan will make choices that aren't what I wrote, but it's always for the best. I like the sort of curveballs he throws into the story. 9 times out of 10, they're always a value add. I think it speaks to his level of experience, skill, and confidence. I've been a fan of his since Green Hornet. He's been at this even longer than I have. I think he's a real storyteller. Just for an example, our Metalis issues in Space Ghost, the way that ended was a little bit more explosive than I had written it. This I had this quiet beat where Space Ghost is holding Metalis up, deciding whether or not to kill him. And when the pages come in, I have we see this panel of Space Ghost just like doing like a Super Saiyan, like super speed punching this guy in the ground. And I was like, that's cool. I like that. That looks really visually interesting and neat. So yeah, Jonathan really does. He interprets the script in his own way, and he'll throw in little flourishes that I think are always really neat. And yeah, Andrew and Taylor, I've actually worked with them both before. So it was nice like getting back into the saddle with them. I worked with Andrew on a Miles Morales short over at Marvel a few years back. And Taylor, he and I did some anthology work together, and we've been friendly for a long time. Actually, Taylor is the whole reason I'm in the industry because he introduced me to my first colorist, the late Jason Smith. Yeah, it's nice having this team clicking and coming together. And I think as we've gotten to know each other better over the course of the last year, I think we're starting to develop a little bit of a shorthand. Like we know what the other one is looking for. We can anticipate what the other one's going to try to do. And so we can lean into each other's strengths. And I think that's the benefit that comes with a longer run. And those longer runs are harder and harder to come by.
Do you have an endpoint in mind for Space Ghost? Or you plan on keeping it going for as long as you can get it going?
Yeah, we just announced that we're going to be relaunching with a new number one in July. So our Space Ghost season two. And that kind of kicks off a brand new storyline after we'll have already wrapped up the Council of Doom and RoboCore's ongoing threads with Space Ghost Annual that's coming out next month. And yeah, I'd love to write this for the long haul. We got to have some conversations about that with Dynamite sooner versus later. I anticipate that we'll have at least another 7 issues, but I'd like to do more if possible, if the demand is there. So we'll see if that's what we get. A 20 issue run is extremely respectable in today's marketplace, but yeah, it's a fun book. It comes very naturally to me. People seem to be responding to it. And I think these characters have a lot of potential, and there's so many cool villains. So I could certainly do another year on the book. If Warner Brothers let me use Herculoids and Teen Force, I could probably add another 8 to 10 months. I'm having a lot of fun in the book, and wherever it lands, I will be thrilled.
Okay, I'm curious. You mentioned these people often in your books. Who's Josh, Victoria, and Megan?
There are licensors at Warner Brothers. And yeah, I think it's a polite thing to have them in the credits. They've been so supportive of the work and they've given us so much latitude that giving them a little name credit, I think, is the least we can do.
So you're also getting ready to do Captain Planet right now, which has been a complete opposite of Space Ghost. Space Ghost was only out for one season, but Captain Planet has this really huge mythology behind it. How did that come about, and how do you figure out what to keep from the old stuff and needs updated, and how do you figure that all out?
Yeah, I've actually been pitching Captain Planet for as long as I've been in the industry. I've always seen the potential behind the concept. I love how diverse and multicultural the cast is, and I love how timely the themes of environmental disaster and combating human greed are. And I think pop culture's caught up with it as well. We're able to inject different strains of DNA. I pitched this book as X-Men meets Avatar: The Last Airbender. And I think Captain Planet, I know, gets a bad rap for being a product of its time, 1990 edutainment, but also that its politics weren't particularly subtle. And I'd argue that reality's gotten a lot less subtle. And I like being able to, the original Captain Planet was meant to speak to children, to be the world outside their window in the year 1990. And that's why I think people look back on it now and see it maybe as a little dated. But I think being able to just age up the audience and then say it's still the world outside your window, it's just the world outside your window today. That really informed a lot of choices that I made for this book. I don't think there's anything broken about Captain Planet. I don't think there's anything broken about Space Ghost. I don't think there's anything broken about Speed Racer. It's always about trying to figure out what the bones are of the property and then figuring out like what little dusting can I do to like make it feel modern and timely and shiny and new. Some of that is following your heart as a writer, like just what interests you about the property, what stands out to you when you're watching these cartoons is important. What are some qualities that resonate that you can figure out a twist to really accentuate those? Um, And then a lot of it's just it's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube or trying to do sculpture. You're doing a lot of this by touch. Does this feel right? And do the pieces click together in a way that feels satisfying to you? And then that's all you can really do besides hope for the best. After a while, you hope you built a track record that people seem to respond to the work and they seem to respond to your story choices and the story math adds up. And yeah, I think beyond that, my goal for Captain Planet specifically was I know environmentalism isn't always the sexiest topic, especially in today's politics where there's everything's on fire. And so for me, the goal was just like, how do we put a human face to this conversation and address, try to bring in as many different facets of the conversation as possible and just try to make the stakes feel personal and immediate. And so that's a lot of the thinking that went into Captain Planet, and at least based on the response of our first issue, which came out last week,
Yes.
people seem to really respond to it. I think for a character that was overlooked for so long, I think Captain Planet and the Planeteers, people are starting to realize that these are really the heroes that meet today's moment.
One more question on that. How much say did you have over the creative team involved with Captain Planet? Do you have any say or does it just come about? How does that work?
Oh, honestly, I was not familiar with Amon Casalos before we started working together, but I'm so thrilled. He's got a style that's like a little Gary Frank and a little Steve Dillon and Frank Quietly as well. Yeah, he came to this book hungry. He came out of the gate swinging, and I love his sense of composition, not just the big blockbuster action, but even like the character acting. I think is really compelling stuff. I think when it comes to especially licensed books, it's one thing for a creator-owned book where those are a little bit they gestate longer. You're the one finding your team, you're pitching that around, you have to prove to a publisher, like, why should you take a chance on me? For licensed books, it's the other way around. They have the property, they have the character, they want the best possible take on it. So they're approaching you. They know where all the bodies are buried in terms of who's busy, what are people's rates, who's looking for work. They'll know that stuff better than I do. So I often try to trust my editors and let them do their jobs just because they will have a better sense of who might be available. I think I've only called my shot once or twice. I know, like when we were doing Space Ghost, we had a couple of names in the mix, and I saw Jonathan's, and I was like, I really want to work with him. Like, I think he could crush this. And that was a quick decision. I wrote a Moon Knight short a few years back, and I asked my editor, I gave him a list of names, and Leonardo Romero was at the top of the list, and Leo happened to be available, so he drew that story. But 9 times out of 10, I don't know who's available. There's so many books either in process or that haven't been announced yet, or who are going to be switching art teams or need to fill in. It's very hard to predict who might be available and who might be a good fit for the style of the story, let alone what will sell it. So that your editors have the 50,000 foot view of everything. And so you have to really just trust them and hope for the best. Thankfully, I've been very lucky and my art teams have all been really stellar.
David Pepose of Space Ghost, the recently launched Captain Planet and Speed Racer coming in July. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. It was a fantastic taping. I appreciate you making the time.
Of course, thanks for having me.